coming in. My name is Lynn Yanyo, and I'm here to introduce the webinar. You've joined ISBM, the Institute for the Study of Business Markets, and our webinar by Laura Patterson today, a customer-centric approach to ramp up your business. Let me talk a little bit about how we're interacting today and who we are. So ISBM, and I don't know that everybody on this call right now knows us. So we were founded in 1982 as a collection of academics from premier institutions around the world doing research in B2B marketing, as well as practitioners from major corporations. And the idea was, we didn't see any academics really working in a focused way on B2B research. Most of it is B2C. Today, we continue with over 40 member firms that shares the learnings that we have from 29 academic fellows and 18 B2B instructors and partners that we use in education and research. So I'm glad you've joined us. Today, you're going to hear from Laura Patterson. She's on the left. This disembodied voice is Lynn Yanyo. I'm the executive director of ISBM, and that is a pre-COVID picture that I really like, so I just keep using it. Today we're in a webinar mode in Zoom, and so that means that you're automatically muted and we don't see your videos. We'd like you to ask questions, and we'd like you to ask questions as soon as you think of them. Just feel free to click on the Q&A little folder at the bottom of your screen. You might have to hover over it to find that control bar and type in your question. I'll be monitoring those questions all during the presentation, and Laura will field them at the end. And I'll field them to her and she'll follow them. We always get asked the question, how do I get this afterward? Because it's hard to take notes. You can see this again. If you're a member of ISBM, it will always be available to you in the B2B Pulse section where you'll log in and be able to get it. And you can also see it for 30 days if you're not a member of ISBM at isbm.com/library. This is a collection of our leadership team at ISBM. Again, my great picture. Rand Mendez, you would have met because he works with all of our members directly. Becky Williams, who manages curriculum. Stefan and Gary on the lower level are the folks that are doing our research. And you'll see a note from me in today's happenings about asking you to participate in a survey of what important topics of research we should be looking at. Every 2 years, we do the survey, and then we focus on those areas of interest to our members. Ralph Oliva is my predecessor, emeritus director, and Lori Nicolini does all the work. You should thank her. We have a lot of fellows. As I mentioned, we have over 29, and this is just a taste there. And we have a lot of member firms. Again, this is just a collection of our members. And if you want to follow up, I'm going to leave this slide up for a few seconds there. Feel free to reach out to myself, Rand, or Becky with any questions. And Laura is going to keep repeating her contact information and look forward to hearing from you if you need to talk to her directly at Vision Edge Marketing. Okay, so let me move up one more thing, Laura, sorry. I want to talk a little bit about what's coming up. So we're just getting ready to build our 2021 calendar. If I reflect on that, I remember that this time last year in 2019, we had built a fabulous 2020 calendar with lots of events, which we immediately had to redo in March of 2021. So I'm hoping, really hoping that when we build the calendar for 2021, that we're going to be in great shape and we'll be able to do that. You should all know that we're not planning for any physical meeting events for at least the first half of the year. That's our feedback that we're hearing from members. And if there's a vaccine and we can all get out a little bit more, perhaps there'll be physical events in the second half of the year. So we'll prepare for that, but we're not planning for it. We should have a full calendar of courses available. And if you're a member, you will be hearing from us one-on-one as we visit with you and talk about your plans for next year. I'll encourage you, if you've got some time or you're looking for some specific data, to go back and visit the library. B2B Pulse is great for curated content as well as really searchable, so feel free to investigate and explore there. Okay, so that's my part. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to introduce Laura Patterson, who's going to put her slides up. Laura has been a true friend of the Institute for so long that we don't want to admit. And she's had several books out. This one is really, really helpful as you think about how you can grow. And particularly in this time, she's going to talk about customer centric. As we were sharing, we've been thinking about customer centricism for at least a decade. And I think it's now finally coming to fruition as we realize when we are so far removed physically from our customer, we really have to have our minds together on this. So I'm going to let her share her slides. And Laura, feel free to tell them more about yourself and the areas of your focus, and take it away.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for being with us. And Lynn, Lori, Ran, and team, thank you for having me. Really excited about talking about something I have personal passion for. We are going to talk a lot about what it means to be customer-centric and how it helps you ramp up your business. That's the focus. Yes, feel free to put questions in, and I would like to make sure we have plenty of time. We are a relatively small group, so we should be able to ask and get exchange and interact with each other. I think that will be where the most value will occur. There are probably some people here who do not know me, and I need to figure out how to move my slides forward. Maybe I have to just do it the old-fashioned way. So I am president of Vision Edge Marketing. We were founded in 1999, so we're 21 years old. Time flew by. And we are kind of recognized as pioneers in the marketing performance management space. You know, my background is in marketing science, marketing operations, and so that bring a very strong perspective to the company from that angle. And so everything we do is about data, analytics, measurement, and process, and how to use those to accelerate growth, create customer value, and improve performance. I'm really excited about our new book, which came out right before everything. It came out in February of this year, and it's available online as an ebook, a regular book, as an Audible, and I understand Lynn has some copies that she's been sharing with people, so that's fantastic. There's three things I want to be sure we can kind of get through today. I want to talk about customer centricity and why it is so essential to organic growth. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about organic growth. And then there's 6 pivotal capabilities that every company needs to grow. And it doesn't matter what kind of company you are, what industry you're in, or what size you are, you need these capabilities. And lastly, I want to talk about some things that are important in terms of choosing to be customer-centric. So that's my thinking. If there's some other thoughts that you all have, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them. So I want to bring up the fact that growth continues to be a mandate. And for those of you who have time to look at the research that comes out on a regular basis, I know when I sat in the chair that many of you are in today, I rarely seem to have time for a Periscope. So one of the things we try to do in our company is do a Periscope work for our customers and people that we work with. And so PwC does a CEO survey and has been doing it for like 21, 22 years. And growth has always been a top of mind topic for CEOs. I mean, that's been their #1 priority for quite a while. If you saw Gartner's study that came out just a little bit ago, their 2020 study they did with CEOs and the senior executives in companies, you can see that growth is not only a CEO mandate, but it is moving further downstream inside organizations. Lots of other things continue to be important. What always worried me about this list that I saw the first time was where customers are in this mix, and we'll come back to talking about that and its implications, but they kind of need to go together, and that happens to be, I think, the most important maybe mismatch in that study is that for those of us who are academically oriented, we might all remember reading Peter Drucker's, who is the father of modern management, that the primary purpose of business is to create a customer. You cannot grow if you don't have customers. And I love this quote by Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight, who says, "The success of your business is inherently intertwined with the success of your customer." So that's why I think customer needs to be a little bit higher on the Gartner study. So how do we go about creating customer success? I mean, we all talk about it. And really, in order to be successful, customer success takes more than having a customer success team or a customer success officer or a chief customer officer or a CRM system. It really is a lot more involved than that. And in the B2B world, it takes far more than just big budgets and mass marketing. Today, customer experience is a strategic imperative. It's also a primary differentiator. People have lots of options today. everywhere for everything. And when you have that many options, and they're oftentimes easy to replicate, fairly easy to replicate, then how do you differentiate? And one of the primary ways that you do that is through customer experience. In fact, according to an Oracle study that was done also quite recently, they do a global study, they looked at customer experience and the impact it has on business. And some of the things that came out of that study is that customer experience impacts loyalty. And we all know that it's much more cost effective to keep a customer than it is to acquire new customers. The value of loyal customers is, of course, is word of mouth and good reviews. And if you saw Trust Radius study that just came out, reviews are one of the most important elements in the B2B journey, the customer buying journey. So having customers who are willing to tell good stories about your company and the experience they have with your company is essential to growth. Customers have way more power than they did even a few years ago. You might remember the age of the customer that Forrester talked about that came on the scene a few years ago. We're very much in agreement with that we are in the age of the customer, and that is only going to increase. Today, the customer expectations are continuing to rise. And if you have a bad experience, people are willing to leave. And there was a time, I think, when people were more likely to stay hostage to an application, to a technology, to a platform, to a company. Today, not so much. And they're willing to pay. They're willing to pay for better experiences. So I think these are important messages that we can take away from this particular study. So let's find out how customer focused we all think we are. So we have several questions, 10 questions. I want you to put yourself in your customer's shoes, and I want you to imagine how they would answer the following 10 questions. And given that we're data oriented, let's use a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being strongly agree, that the customer would say strongly agree, and 1 strongly disagree. We're not going to put anyone on the spot, but we'll ask a question in a moment. So here's the questions. I'm not going to do any animation. I'm just going to put them up here, read them out loud, take your time to answer. So they would say, as a supplier or partner, you, that is your company, is able to mobilize your company on their behalf or on behalf better than your competitors. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10, they would strongly agree, 1, they would strongly disagree, that you play a leading role in shaping the supply chain. Again, 1 through 10, that you are integral and essential part of their supply chain, that you understand how we purchase and decide to buy, that you go out of your way to understand what value means more than your competitors, that you carefully develop new products and services with what they value, what we value as our driving factors, that you have done a good job in integrating your processes, you understand the business well enough to create solutions that will give your customers a better competitive advantage. 2 more. They can count. So we can count on you to know which of your products or services we buy and whether the current portfolio is still appropriate. And lastly, we prefer your products and services over your competitors because they meet our needs or solve our problems better. So on a scale of 1 to 10, for each one of those, score, give yourself a score. Of course, you can add those all up and figure out where you are out of 100, but here's my real question to you. Did you score 8 or better on every question? That's really something I want you to think about. So put in the chat, if you scored 8 and better on every question, like raise your hand or something like that, and we'll come back to that towards the end. So if you scored 8 or better, we're awesome, congratulations. If not, then there's probably a few things you might want to think about in terms of where to go from here. So with that in mind, I want to introduce a framework that might help you, particularly if you didn't score as high on some of these questions as you would like. And we call it the circle of traction. It is a framework that we have been using for over 20 years to help our customers achieve the growth imperative. Now, I want to give credit to one of the ISBM members, and that's John Jacko, because this book would not exist without John Jacko. John Jacko, who is currently the Chief Growth Officer at Pentair, he and I have worked together as he's gone through various stages of his career journey. And many, many years ago, in our first encounter, I had the luxury when working with him to share our growth, our circle of traction and a growth workshop for him. And in his most recent role as the Chief Growth Officer at Pentair, I got an opportunity to do that workshop again. And he asked me at one point in time, when will you ever share this circle of traction? Like maybe write a book. Okay, so this is why we have Fast Track Your Business, is due to John Jacko. So thank you, John Jacko, for inspiring me to write another book. So you can see all the different things. This is a wheel. And I want you to think of it as a wheel with the starting point at customer and opportunity insights. That's where it starts. And you go around this wheel, and we will talk about the center, which is the axle for the wheel, because as you all know, in order for a wheel to turn, you have to have a shaft or an axle. So with that in mind, I want to introduce the 6 imperatives, with the first one being having a customer-centric approach. And actually, what does that mean? So as you guys are thinking about customer centricity, one of the things that came up in a conversation with Lynn and others is, if we just have really good customer support, are we customer centric? And I would say not necessarily, because customer support is reactive and customer centricity is about being proactive. And it is by far the most important and first pivotal capability. It's not a new idea, by the way. For those of you who are avid readers and you're thinking about what you'd like to read in addition to Fast Track Your Business, I'd encourage you to pick up John Galbraith's book that came out in 2005, which is on designing a customer-centric organization, a guide to strategy. So I think that might be a good place to start if you were struggling with any of those questions. And he said, I want to make sure I get his quote right, so that's what I'm looking for. Today, nobody owns the customer owns you. And I think that is probably one of the most important messages out of his book. So while customer-centric may seem very much like a buzzword, and you've all probably been hearing a lot about it, you have to discard the hype, separate that from what does it really mean to be customer-centric. So if we think about customer centricity, I think the way to think about it from a B2B perspective, particularly for ISBN members who often have real products that they make, manufacture, distribute, and bring to market, product centricity starts with having a product or service that responds to a customer need. And you get as many customers as possible to sell that product to. But customer centricity starts with a customer need, not with a product idea. And it really is an individual customer or market requirement that you then can expand beyond that customer. It extends beyond that customer or that set of customers. So in order to realize growth with customer centricity, it's how you make a difference in the market and create value for customers. Okay, so here's the way to think about that. Ask yourself if your company can answer these 2 questions very succinctly and very clearly. What is of value to your customers, and what is your value to your customers? So if you can answer those 2 questions, you're well on your way. Succinctly, clearly, like in 11 words or less. The key is that you have to really be solving a problem, a compelling, relevant, urgent problem. That's what's important when you start thinking about the answer. And that takes us to pivotal capability number 2, which is upstream versus downstream. So this is not a new idea. Again, I want to share with you some work for your reading list. Ram Charan wrote a book called Profitable Growth is Everyone's Business. And he really goes into explaining the difference between upstream and downstream in general. And the thing to keep in mind is that is a great phrase from a CEO here in town I have tremendous admiration for. And Dave at Alter is known as Dave Sikora. He often says, if the upstream is not right, the downstream will be polluted. And I think that's a really good message to keep in mind. Upstream is where all the strategy work is done. It's where you do all your thinking. It's where you understand what are the customer's needs, what will be your value proposition, answering those first two questions, how you will position your company, directing any innovation, whether that's in processes or in services. All of that is upstream work. And I contend that many marketers have abandoned the upstream work. And this is one of the biggest, I will throw down the gauntlet for CMOs, that they need to pick that back up and get more engaged in the upstream. Because everything that you do in the downstream, which we talk all about in marketing today, that depends on how strong you are at the upstream. So let me see if I can articulate it a little more. Upstream, all those strategic processes, all your segmentation work, all your analysis work around how customers use your products or services, everything around how you create a competitive advantage, all upstream. Everything you're doing in the world of whether it's video, social, digital marketing, digital advertising, pay per click, PR, thought leadership, content marketing, and the list goes on, mobile, whatever it is, anything that's around communication engagement, that's all in the downstream. So think about your organization. How many people do you have in your organization that do upstream versus how many people you have in your organization that do downstream? We find that often in many marketing organizations, there's few, if any, that are really focused on upstream, but an entire army of people focused on downstream. So what should you be doing if you had somebody involved in upstream? Well, first, you would define, that's where all the value proposition work is done. And innovation, how will you drive innovation for your company? There are many customers we work with who believe that future revenue will be coming from products that don't even exist yet in their company. Therefore, you have to have somebody who has a process around innovation in order to ensure long-term sustainable growth. And those innovations should be driven by where you see the market going, so macro and micro trends, what customers are going to require, all of those things, right? So again, you have to have somebody who's involved in that. Data and analytics that emphasize customer insights, competitive intelligence, segmentation, differentiation. It's amazing to me how many times we'll be working with companies. They have very few, if any, established marketing models, whether those are segmentation models, persona models, customer journey mapping models, lift models, all kinds of models, very few. And they should be in every library, and those are developed in the upstream. And then, of course, metrics is all done through the upstream because it's all based on how you're going to measure the success for your company and for your organization. So things like category ownership, customer lifetime value, share of wallet, these are upstream oriented measures. Downstream supports what I would call demand with a little d. This is where, again, the work you'll do in order to support that value proposition, in order to support product adoption, in order to build out the right touches and the right activities and the right channels. And the measures here are very different. They're much more associated with things that are like visitors and shares and clicks and SEO rankings and contacts added to the pipeline and so forth and so on. And those go on forever. So my point here is that customer-centric organizations that are high performing, they use both and they excel at both. So think about that as a capability. So in the Gartner annual CMO study, again, something that recently came out, talking about how organizations are going to fuel growth in 2021, they said three things were top marketing priorities. One is brand strategy, and brand in the broadest sense, not brand in a specific product or solution, but brand as in your organization, your entity, your company. Market analytics and marketing ops. Those are the three top priorities in order to grow. So this takes us to pivotal capability number 3, actionable insights derived from data. Our company has been talking about data and analytics and data-informed insights and data-derived insights since 1999. And that's my heritage. That's where I come from. I come from that part of the marketing world. So I feel particularly passionate about this. We are inundated with data. We very rarely meet a company or an organization that doesn't have any data. The real challenge is what to do with the data they have and to use it in a way that they can make decisions. I think that's the question here. So here's my question for you. What is one customer decision you need to make to grow next year? What is one customer decision you need to make to grow next year? Now's the time to answer that question. And then my next question to you is, what is one thing you need to know that will help you make that decision? What do you need to know? And then how will you find that answer? That's the three things that go into this pivotal capability, is asking that question, answering those questions, and then determining what data you need to get the answer and how you will go about getting that data. Now, this in itself is a huge topic. And we don't have time today to spend a lot of time on this huge topic, but it is something I want you to pay attention to because it does require flexing data and analytics muscle and being able to get insights from customers. And there's all different ways to get that insight. And that data is coming in from your social media, from your email, from your website, from your Google Analytics, from everywhere and every which way, is being able to pull those insights together and do something with them. But it also means up periscope, looking up outside at what are your competitors doing and what is the market doing, and bringing those things together in some ways so that they intersect. Once you bring all that data together, the key is to be able to get insights from that data, looking for the patterns in the data and determining which patterns are germane, meaningful, and relevant, and which ones aren't. And I know a lot of organizations are moving to machine learning and AI in order to analyze data. The thing that's important is sometimes there's non-obvious information in data that is critical. And that is a really important thing that oftentimes can't be done without having human expertise. So humans need to be good at this. We cannot discard this capability and just give it over to machines or AI. Humans still need to be involved. We can let machines and AI help us do things faster, but we still need to be capable of looking at the data and understanding what it means, deriving the insights from it, articulating what we learn from them, and then making decisions about what action to take. That is a very human part of the job. And we need to know, okay, here's what it's saying. What are we going to do with it? What action are we going to take? How will we use this to inform next steps, our plan, our strategy, even all of the downstream activities? So that I want to now introduce pivotal capability number 5, because data and analytics significantly impact everything we do in an organization. But one of the two of the biggest areas or things it impacts is segmentation and positioning. So segmentation is an interesting conversation. How do you do segmentation? Where do you go next to grow? Do we go spend more of our energy and invest in segments we're already in? Doing more sub-segmentation? Do we look for adjacent segments? Do we look for new segments? What do we do? You need data to do that. You also need good models to do that. And same with positioning. Going out and actually testing that and building your positioning around your segments and around the personas associated with those segments. We have a lot of people that always are talking about revenue. This is how much money we need to make. As you're thinking about your next plan, and I know you probably will have a revenue target, please be sure to break that apart and parse that out by customers and by segments. Because as marketers, as CMOs, and as chief growth officers, chief revenue officers, we really don't market to buckets of revenue. We market to people, back to being customer centric. So we need to understand who those people are. How do they buy? What do they buy? Who do they buy from? What are the problems they have, right? We need to think about the segments that we are in, and you need to have really good ways of building models. There's lots of ways to do it, but have one that's based on data. So if you don't have a segmentation model in your library, this would be sort of one of the first things I would recommend that you do. And then formulate positioning and value props that are relevant and compelling to those segments. Which takes us to pivotal capability number 6, the last thing, as I've already sort of alluded to, which is planning and execution. And this is where marketing ops obviously plays a critical role. So we've talked about strategy, which is one of the top priorities. We've talked about data and analytics, a second priority, and now talking about planning and execution, which really takes excelling at marketing operations. So how do you begin to do planning and execution? We would say you align to what your customers value. So you go back to those first two questions. See, we're going full circle now. And you start with thinking about how do we align to what they value and make sure that we plan and execute accordingly. So it's a choice. So when you're customer centric, every decision starts with answering 5 questions. So I'm going to give you those 5 questions as we go full circle. What are your customers' needs, pains, and passions? And I like to add this. We have a blog post on where the intersection of pain and passion for building out value propositions. It's a fun read. You might want to check that one out. But that's back to the very beginning of the circle of traction, those insights. How do you solve those problems today? How do they need to be solved in the future? How can you help solve them and or help the customer realize them? How do you do it better than your alternatives? And then how will you communicate the value? At the very minimum, you should be able to answer these questions. That will be helping you get on your way to really having a real focus on the customer and being customer centric in a proactive fashion, not a reactive one. Because organic growth is really a machine, and that machine starts with customers, markets, and products. And to do that, I want to introduce the concept of the value chain and reversing the value chain. So for those of us who come from product-centric organizations, I spent 14 of my years of my career in the semiconductor industry, a good portion of the rest of my career in financial services and in software. So everything was pretty much product-centric. You start with creating a value, of creating a product, you make it, you sell it, right? And product design becomes really important all the way down to where you do marcom, tactical marketing, and sales. But if we reverse if we want to be customer centric, we need to reverse the value chain. And that is you choose the value first. And that starts with those segments, needs and wants, then building out the value prop, and then delivering on the value. This is where product comes into place, the solution comes into play, and then communicating that value. It seems like it might just be a nuance, but it actually is a significantly different process for many organizations. Something maybe for you to think about again is how do you do that today? So to do this well, you have to understand the customer journey and customer personas. I think it was the CEB that maybe came out a few years ago that said, in the B2B journeys, X% of the journey and decision is made before they even have contact with the company. That's probably still true. But today, people do all kinds of things as they go through their journey, and they land on your website and they download content and they read content and they watch videos long before they're ready to make a purchase. Oftentimes, though, in marketing, we think they're ready to make a purchase because after all, they came, they downloaded, they did something, they engaged with us. So it's really important to map the customer journey and the persona to understand where that level of engagement fits inside that customer's journey and match that journey to what you do internally, not the other way around. Starting with their journey and then matching that and mapping that to your marketing and sales process. So, which things are tied to making contact? How do you know that they're ready to connect? How do we then convert that to a conversation and eventually move them to consideration? Because we often think they're further along in the process of consideration than they actually are. And so that's something that we need to really get clarity around. So start there, because different triggers and actions in your downstream are tied to understanding this very upstream oriented model. And a way to think about that is and leveraging customer journey with opportunity management is, in the very beginning, customers investigate. And to investigate, you need to educate them. When they want to make contact and connection. So you want to think about those kinds of activities that are tied to the front end in your upstream and then in your downstream, and match those together. In the middle, when they're in the evaluation and selection phase, that's where conversation and consideration begins to occur. And then lastly, they move into purchase and decision and advocacy, right? Because remember the conversation or the research done by Oracle, we want customers to ultimately become loyal to us and become advocates for us. And that's when they become members of our community. So as you think about your customer journey and those and the mix of touches, content, and channels, how might that look? So here's an example of one for one of our customers, sort of what kinds of things they needed to do at some point in time. Do you all remember that SlideShare program? Well, today it's being done through other things, but this particular customer, that was where the first contact was being made on a third-party platform. And then how they moved and what the role an analyst report played, which came through a LinkedIn display ad, and then how that moved over to an actual industry event, a session presentation, right? This was the beginning. And they really were in very early stages. Before they really did the mapping, they thought that this customer was much further along in the buying process when they were at very, very early stages. So give that some thought as you put your maps together and overlay them with your touches, channels, and content. I want to leave our conversation and wrap up and make sure we have time for a really healthy discussion, since the numbers of us allow for that, and talk shortly about this axle. So in order for a wheel to turn, it needs an axle or it needs a shaft. And there are 4 things that are fundamental in terms of making the circle of traction turn. The first and foremost one is structure and culture. You have to have the right culture. You have to have a customer-centric, customer-focused culture in order for it to work, and your organization has to be structured accordingly. So if you don't have that in place, it's going to hold you back. You also need people and skills, and the people need to understand what it means about what it means to be customer-centric. You need to hire people who are customer-centric. I have a very brief story. That I have just a few minutes. So when I worked at Motorola and I had the number 2 customer account for our business unit, and we were in allocation on a particular set of products. And at Motorola, if you walked out of the factory with product in your hands, it was kind of grounds for termination. But we were on allocation, and I had the number 2 customer. And so I started collecting functional product that wasn't coming out of the factory in order to make sure that this particular customer did not go lying down. And I don't know if you're familiar what rails look like in the semiconductor industry, and many of you don't know how tall I am, but I'm not very tall. I'm just, on a good day, 5'2". And these rails are really tall. I mean, they're long. And so here I am, this little bit of a thing, walking with right in front of security, in my arm, on a pretty consistent basis, with bundles and bundles of rails out the door. Because in our company, it was all about taking care of the customer and ensuring customer success. And we would never want a customer to go lying down. And so I would walk out and I would take that product to the airport personally and ship it counter to counter. Not through shipping, no waiver, no anything. And every week in our war room meeting, I would take abuse for, circumventing the system. But at the end of every meeting, someone would say to me on the way out the door, you do know that that's our number 2 customer. So we can never let them go lying down. Clearly, I didn't ask for permission to take product from the company. And clearly, I wasn't being given permission to take product without going through the process, but I wasn't getting fired because the culture was taking care of customers, customer focused, customer centric. Really wasn't about customer support. It was about being proactive with that particular customer. So you have to hire people and give them and arm them with the skills to be able to do their job. You need processes and tools and infrastructure in place to support it. And of course, you need the data and analytics. I don't know if I would have fared so well if I had had some other customer in this particular situation. So I think exercising good judgment is really important, but also again, the data and analytics about the future and where the business was going and who this customer was and what it might mean for their future. All of that came into play in the decision that I chose to make. So that's just a quick story. So I want to leave you with these takeaways. It's all about growth. It always is. We can't grow without customers. And in the words of Phil Kotler, it's about finding, keeping, and growing the values of customers. Customer centricity is a choice, and it takes a different focus. It is about being proactive, not reactive. In order to be customer centric, we have to focus on solving problems and creating value. That means upstream before downstream. What you do with insights from the data is what's important, and that takes skilled human beings. And lastly, reverse the value chain and align that to the customer journey. So I know that Lynn has sent some books out to folks. At the very back of the book is access to our organic growth readiness assessment document. It's free. Just go online, follow the instructions, and you can download it. This will give you some additional insights. The book is chock full of workbooks and worksheets and other things that will help you along the way. It's meant to be a working guide. For those of you who are interested in reaching out to me, I'm happy to connect with you at any time. You can reach me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, or send me an email. We're all about that. And we publish frequently. So every week there's new content on our blog. So with that, Lynn, I think I'd like to stop sharing and make the conversation open to the folks, since we only, we have a couple dozen folks. Let's talk.
Great. Thank you, Laura. So thank you so much for that. It was a really nice overview. And so there's some questions that are coming in, but I will say to the few that are here, I do have some books from Laura, and I have 5. And the first 5 of you that figure out what my email address is, because I sent it earlier, or go to isbm.com and find my email address and send me a note that gives me a mailing address I can send it to, because I know you all aren't at the office. I will send you. So the first 5 will get it. Okay. I had my first notice from Ralph, and he's just making a comment because you remember Ralph, and Ralph has lived the world that you have lived at TI. And so he says he's very proud of you for doing what's right for the customer, because we all know that could have got you fired, but it didn't, right? And I think, many of us who have lots of years of experience working directly, because maybe we were in product development, or we were in customer service, or we were in tech support, or they were our direct customer in sales, would do things that we just ask forgiveness later.
Exactly.
And the fact that we talk about it that way, that we talk about it as, wait, I think I broke the rules there, even now, says that we somehow don't get this customer centricity, right? I remember when I was running customer service for a global organization, and folks would come and ask for permission to do things. And I just basically said, no, just if the customer needs it, and it's not going to cost us $1 million, do it. Just tell me what you did. And there was a lot of fear about breaking rules. But it's about how does your culture work, I think. We've got a couple of things that have come in here. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything.
I wanted to comment on that. I do think that's true. And what I do run into a lot more today than 20 years ago is how more paralyzed people are, how less predisposed they are to draw outside the lines. And I'm not, again, so that goes back to culture. I wonder what that means about the leadership of those organizations, if people are that afraid to take a risk on behalf of a customer. I'm not suggesting you take a risk that isn't on behalf of a customer that will get you fired, but taking care of customers, maybe it'll get you fired, but at least you did the right thing, right? Taking care of customers, how can that ever be wrong? Mm-hmm. So I just want to encourage people to maybe be open to drawing out, coloring outside the line, so to speak.
Yeah. So we have people attending that, might actually own that culture enough that they could change how people think about it. And then there are others that are living in the culture, and I'm sure they're just wondering. The question that really, I think, leaped out at me as I was listening to the circle is that if I'm a company that's not already operating in that circle, and I'm going to get on the circle at some point, I already have these established business processes. Is there, how do you break into it? Where is the point that you say, you know what, I'm going to start here in my processes and start changing so I can get into this mode of that circle of traction? Where's a good starting point?
So, that old saying, in God we trust, all others bring data? Mm-hmm. I find that companies do want data. The leadership team wants to know the facts. So if you can bring a compelling story and tell it in a compelling way that uses real data about your customers or about your market or about your competition, you can usually insert that into the conversation and cause a thoughtful response.
Mhm.
And what I would recommend is be open to fast experiments. Make a recommendation for an experiment, a fast experiment where you can see if it works and then iterate. Use Agile in your process, and that will go a long way to getting people to be willing to change. I think trying to make a huge change, implement this huge change management thing is daunting and probably is going to be met with reluctance. So Ralph, he knows that I adore him, and he was a fierce competitor, but now he's a great friend. I want to say he will recognize this word, and it's called skunkworks. I don't know if that word exists or phrase exists anymore in the world of business. We use it here in our company, and we use it with our customers, but it was a major part of my career. Find a way to create a skunkworks. Skunkworks are those experiments that are off the books that allow you to begin to move the needle inside the company. So consider how you might do that. Now we're in the world of COVID and a lot of people are working remotely. So how do you do those kinds of experiments? We're going to take a little bit, you're going to have to be a lot more thoughtful, right? And how you do that and how you do that collaboratively. But that would be my recommendation. Bring data, make a recommendation for a fast fail experiment, implement it, iterate, and move on.
Mhm. Great. Yeah. Patrick Kenny, another one of our best buddies, has a question about the world of COVID, right? So some of the 4 axle points have been reduced or stressed in the COVID world. What are the 1 or 2 most important that you must preserve in your worldview?
Well, hi, Patrick. It's good to see you here. Thanks for joining us. Um, I would say culture. Everything starts and ends with culture. And if you don't have, culture is the #1 thing that has to be preserved in a company, especially about being customer centric. And we have a lot of stressed out people right now. And that can make it really hard for them to be taking care of customers when they're having trouble taking care of themselves. So the second thing would be people. Culture and people would be the 2 things that you need to preserve, because there can't be a business that can be customer focused without those 2 things.
Mhm. Mhm. How long have you seen it take a company to transition from wherever they are to really being able to run this customer centricity well? Is it measured in years?
I think it's measured in commitment. Uh, it, if you're serious about it, it can move very quickly, because if you reward the right behaviors, people will adopt them relatively quickly, right? If you have consequences for people who don't do the culture or the new things in time, right? That's that old adage, how do you go about doing change management? Well, you start with a bunch of carrots at first, and then eventually you get to consequences that are less satisfying, to get the people that are not getting on board to get on board. And then eventually you weed out and terminate people who won't get on board, so that you can move forward and make the transformation that you need to make. I mean, oftentimes that's what they call, right sizing in some organizations, or getting the right. What was that old saying, Lynn? Getting the right people on the bus and the right seats, or what was that?
The right people in the right seats on the bus, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it can happen quite quickly if people are serious. It doesn't. This is not something that should take years
Mhm.
to do. And in fact, I would suggest that if it's taking years to do, there's something wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So there's somebody dragging their feet, right? Yeah.
Yeah, probably at the top.
Yeah, so that's the other piece that I hear you. I hear you saying about that, just like almost any large change, right? It has to start at the top. Have you ever seen it successfully come from groundswell? Enough people that are just willing to do the right thing for the customer that it changes the environment?
I think you have to have somebody that is that has a leadership role, embrace it and sponsor it. It doesn't have to be at the very top, but it has to be someone who is pivotal. Pivotal. My supervisor has arrived. Someone who is pivotal and can push the organization and protect people who do the work. So it doesn't have to be the CEO. It could be a VP. It could be somebody else in the organization that carries a lot of clout or has a lot of influence or carries a lot of weight. So it doesn't have to be at the very top. I don't know if it would be some, a groundswell in the sense of grassroots, because think about an organization. In order for any team to be mobilized, there has to be someone that mobilizes them. I think that's really an important thing. I do worry sometimes about silos, though. The idea that, well, we have a customer success team, so we all don't need to worry about that. Or we have a chief customer officer, so we don't need to worry about that, right? That is actually dangerous. If you're going to be a customer-centric organization, everybody has to have the focus on the customer. It's not only owned by this team or this group. They may have certain responsibilities, and those need to be very clear, but that doesn't negate everyone's job having that customer focus.
Great. That's great. I took a pause for a second to just see how my emails were doing. That was pretty fast work, folks. I'm just looking at the minutes in which people came in. So clearly, Laura, people want your book. You also have this, I think, on Amazon, right? So if they want
Yes, the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And I don't know if we have any Austinites with us, but it's also at Book People. We haven't gotten it into any of the other independent booksellers just yet. It is available on Audible. It's available as an ebook. It's available as a hard copy or paperback. So we've tried to make it in any form factor that would be helpful to people. Whatever today, everyone has a different preference. So we're trying to be accommodating. And as I said, Barnes and Noble carries it too.
Okay. So we have one more question that came in, which is really thoughtful. So what are your thoughts on shareholder value in this whole process?
Well, what I understand, as someone who owns shares in companies, including my own, my value only goes up if my company grows and I have customers. So customer lifetime value, customer value determines shareholder value. So this is another opportunity for me to say something about my dear friend Ralph. Ralph and I wrote an article together. Oh gosh, time gets away from me, Ralph, but it's been a few years, for the AMA, and it was Main Street versus Wall Street or something along that line. Ralph, pipe in if you can. Anyway, what we basically talked about is if you take care of your customers and you're customer focused, you will take care of your shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay. So that means keeping everybody aligned, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Patrick, I didn't know whether you're still at PPG or not. I know that you had been there for a long while. And you made an interesting point. I was just looking at it in the chat box. I'm looking.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to actually ask the question because I think a lot of us have worked at companies where there are established product lines that are large and you're trying to grow, and the scale of this new business is small relative to the large business. So those large customers drive all of the customer centricity. And how do you break out of that to make sure that these smaller customers, which don't have scale yet, but you'd like them to, how do you transition for that? Or how do you make sure that that doesn't happen?
That's a great question. And this goes back again to another adage. People perform to how they're measured. So if net new revenue from new products, if revenue from new products is a key measure of success to the organization, that will make a shift, right? So I always ask this question when we're working with companies. And this is a question every chief growth officer, chief marketing officer, chief revenue officer, chief customer officer ought to be asking this question. How will we measure success by the end of next year? And not in terms of revenue. If they say revenue, then the question ought to be, what kind of revenue? What products? What customers, right? Those three kinds of questions that I said earlier, customers, markets, and products, get those answers in that question, because if that becomes, once you know those truths, know that's how success is measured, that's actually what goes on the dashboard. So now every decision that's being made in the company should be moving those needles, whatever those needles are. So if revenue from new customers for new products and new markets is important and everyone's monitoring it, that will help make that shift. So it really does come down to how you measure.
Yeah, and making sure that those metrics actually stick, right? Because ingrained, I'm not trying to focus on any one particular job description, but finance folks, right? Finance folks build a financial model, and it is what it is, right? So they're like, here's top line sales, here's what profitability, here's EBITDA at the bottom, and you don't get to change that in their minds unless somehow you change it in their minds and say, sales from new products is just as important or more important than this top line sales revenue from this current customer who's never going to grow, but we don't want to lose them, right? The protect mode takes over so well that it's so hard sometimes.
Well,
Yeah.
this goes back to strategy, which we don't have a lot more time to talk about, but the strategy being, where are we placing our bets, which is the future, which every CFO, not every, I need to say that more carefully, because that's not true. There are some CFOs that are strictly on just on the numbers, but there are a lot of CFOs out there today that are very strategically oriented. And so they understand the company needs to make some big bets. So there's going to be some big bets. Then there's going to be somewhere protect our strengths, protect our our core, and then there may be some even defensive measures just to make sure that you stay competitive, or there's some competitive things. So if you build out the strategy, the company strategy, then the finance numbers should line to that, and they usually do. So I think that's, again, understanding and breaking apart or parsing out revenue into customers, markets, and products makes a huge difference, no matter what size you are. Instead of just having, we want X number of dollars in revenue by the end of the year. That is useless.
Mm-hmm.
Useless. If I could be so bold.
Yeah.
You can quote me on that. She said it was useless. Next question?
So Gary Lillian has a question there. It says, speak to implementing these ideas within the sales force.
Oh, Salesforce. Okay, well, I think what you mean is CRM, any CRM system. And that doesn't just have to be Salesforce, because there are others out there. I do realize that they're the 800-pound gorilla. So Salesforce, if we're talking about it in its original view of being a customer relationship management tool, which means that you would have customers going into the system, it would be interesting and helpful as part of your fit and opportunities scoring, which I know you can do inside Salesforce. There's ways to do scoring capability, is to indicate if they are a part of a net new opportunity, net new growth initiative. That should be part of the scoring. So I think a lot of times people are not thinking through their scoring in their CRM systems very carefully. And so if you think about the strategic imperatives of the company, so if it's some product that is key to the future, or solution or service, some segment that's key to the future of the company, all those things, that should be part of your scoring model. And oftentimes that's missing. So that would be where I would look at it inside Salesforce or any other CRM system.
Great. And then Gary says, no, really, I meant actually Salesforce.
Alrighty, Gary, I was caught up in my marketing ops tools world. My apologies. Yes. Okay. So, but the same applies, right? Is having clarity around how you're going to reward salespeople based on which customers, markets, and products you want to pursue. So your comp systems can be set up differently. Obviously, appropriate training. I mean, all kinds of things go into Salesforce enablement, Salesforce training, Salesforce compensation. So there's a lot of elements associated with that. And that's a pretty big topic. But that's a great question. Thank you, Gary, for clarifying that.
Great. Okay, so we're like 1 minute off, and I want to make sure that you all know, and if you want to just verify again, that Laura Patterson is willing to take your emails or your questions later. Feel free to check in with her. She'd love to hear from you. I've got 5 takers for books. I'll be mailing those out today. So thank you all much for that. I mean, maybe that's something I need to do for every one of these. We'll have some little giveaways. I really appreciate you all joining us. This was, thank you, Laura. That was perfect. This was our last webinar of the year, unless, as I regularly do, I get somebody who says, oh no, I've got a great idea. So maybe there'll be something in December, but we don't have anything scheduled. Do look to isbm.com for our calendar for next year. And we hope to hear from you no matter what. If there's anything we can help out with, please reach out. Thank you again, Laura.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I think this might be my last one for the year too.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Be well, stay safe.